If someone had told Elena Steele that the most important day of her life would begin with a funeral, she wouldn't have believed them. But life rarely announces turning points. Sometimes it just places everyone in the same room and let the truth walk in. Elena stood near the first row of the chapel, dressed in simple black, her posture straight, her face calm in a way grief normally doesn't allow. Soft organ music filled the space while people spoke in quiet voices. Today she buried the only person who had always chosen her, her mother. But Elena wasn't watching the ceremony. She was watching the entrance. Because she knew they would come. People like them always came when appearances mattered. 7 years. 7 years since her younger sister had taken the one thing Elena never thought she could lose. 7 years since she lost her fiancé. 7 years since she learned betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from people who grew up in the same house. The chapel doors opened, and there they were. Natalie Steele entered first. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect grief performance. A large diamond ring caught the light as she removed her gloves slowly, making sure people noticed. Behind her walked Edwin Knight, the man Elena was once supposed to marry. Time had refined him. Expensive suit, controlled expression, the quiet confidence of someone used to power. Natalie leaned toward him and whispered something. He smirked slightly. Elena remembered that smirk. Natalie scanned the room like someone checking whether the audience was watching. Then she saw Elena, and for half a second, her confidence flickered. Because Elena wasn't destroyed. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She looked composed. And Natalie had never known how to compete with someone who no longer needed approval. Natalie approached slowly. Edwin followed, neither of them yet understanding what had changed. "I'm surprised you came," Natalie said softly. Elena answered evenly. "My mother deserved dignity." Natalie tilted her head slightly, still measuring, still competing. Then her eyes dropped to Elena's left hand. Looking, searching, comparing. Elena noticed immediately, so she adjusted her sleeve slightly. Just enough. A wedding band appeared, simple, elegant, not loud. Natalie's eyes froze. "You're married?" she asked, neutral tone, tight jaw. Elena smiled calmly. "Yes." Edwin studied her now, carefully. "To who?" he asked. Elena held his gaze a moment too long. "You'll meet him." And for the first time, Edwin Knight looked uncertain. That was the first shift in power. But this story didn't begin today. It began long before betrayal, before humiliation, before Elena learned one of the most dangerous truths about human nature. Some people don't want your life. They want to take it from you. Elena Steele grew up in a quiet suburb outside Portland. Nothing luxurious, nothing impressive. Just a structured home built on discipline and emotional strength by their mother, Margaret Steele. Margaret believed character mattered more than comfort. "Life tests people quietly," she used to say. "You only see who someone is when they think no one is watching." Elena took those words seriously. Even after she moved to the city, even after she built her career in corporate strategy, even after she became the most financially stable person in the family, she still called her mother almost daily. Not because she needed help, because she trusted her. Margaret never interfered. She just listened. And somehow always knew when Elena wasn't saying everything. 8 months before her death came the diagnosis. Late-stage cancer, fast progression, limited options. Elena remembered the exact moment the doctor stopped talking about treatment and started talking about time. That was when she understood. This wasn't about survival. This was about preparation. Margaret reacted differently. She organized paperwork, made lists, simplified decisions. Even then, she was protecting her daughters, even the one who would later destroy the family. Her final weeks were spent at home. No hospital smell, no machines, just familiar walls, family photographs, memories. Elena was holding her hand when she passed. "You will be okay," Margaret whispered. Not hope, certainty. "You are stronger than what people will try to do to you." Elena didn't understand then how accurate that was. 6 years earlier, Elena Steele's life looked successful. 34 years old, senior communications director, financially secure, respected, independent, and emotionally empty. She worked long hours, dated occasionally. Nothing lasted. Until she met Edwin Knight. Edwin was the kind of man who didn't need attention because he already had influence. At 41, he had already exited one logistics software company and was funding 2 startups. The business media called him strategic. Partners called him calculating. Competitors called him dangerous. Elena thought he was disciplined. Their connection was immediate. Mutual ambition, mutual intelligence, mutual emotional control. Their first dinner lasted 4 hours. Their first month felt effortless. Their first year looked perfect. Trips, private events, investor dinners. A lifestyle Elena never chased but adapted to naturally. Edwin was precise even in romance. Thoughtful gifts, carefully planned dates, predictable reliability. After 15 months, he proposed. Private rooftop dinner, minimal audience, maximum control, a 7-carat diamond ring. Elena said yes immediately. Margaret Steele cried, not because of money, because she believed Elena had finally found stability. Natalie Steele reacted differently. Natalie always reacted differently. Natalie Steele was 3 years younger, but psychologically they had always existed inside competition. If Elena achieved something, Natalie needed something bigger. If Elena received praise, Natalie needed attention. If Elena built stability, Natalie created drama. Childhood patterns don't disappear. They evolve. Elena still chose Natalie as maid of honor. Hope, denial, family loyalty. People always believe maturity fixes rivalry. It doesn't. It just makes it quieter. The first time Natalie met Edwin, she showed too much interest, too many questions, too much laughter, too much physical proximity. Elena noticed, ignored it. Because trusting your sister is supposed to be safe. The engagement party took place at their mother's house. Lights, wine, plans, future. Natalie helped organize everything. Perfect behavior, perfect optics. But Elena noticed small things. Natalie watched Edwin when she thought no one saw. Edwin checking his phone when Natalie walked by. Nothing obvious, just discomfort. Later, Margaret pulled Elena aside. "I want you to be careful," she said gently. Elena smiled. "Mom, we're adults." Margaret didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced. 3 months before the wedding, Edwin changed. Later nights, shorter replies, less presence, then subtle criticism. "Your laugh is too loud. That dress isn't flattering. You read too late." Micro-erosion. Meanwhile, Natalie became extremely helpful. Vendor meetings, schedules, frequent calls, perfect sister again. Too perfect. One Thursday, Elena finally asked, "Is something wrong?" Edwin smiled. "Work stress, investor pressure, product launch, logical, believable." Until the perfume. Not hers. Sweet, distinct, intentional, he explained. Investor meeting. Goodbye hug. Reasonable. Elena wanted to believe him, because the alternative meant collapse. She met her friend Rachel Dawson the next morning. Rachel listened, then said, "Everyone panics before marriage." Logical, comforting, wrong. Because Elena wasn't panicking. She was recognizing patterns. That night, Margaret noticed. "You feel something is wrong?" she said quietly. Elena didn't answer. Margaret squeezed her hand. "Trust the part of you that notices change." Elena would later realize that was the last warning she ever received, and she didn't understand it until everything was already broken. At first, Elena Steele tried to convince herself it was just stress. Weddings did that to people. Deadlines, budgets, expectations, family pressure. She told herself she was overthinking, so she tried harder. She booked a spa weekend for Edwin, bought things he once said he liked, cooked meals he used to request, tried to become again the woman he had proposed to. The harder she tried, the further he seemed to move away. That was the first thing she didn't understand yet. You cannot compete with someone who has already decided to betray you. The first real crack appeared during something small, a cake tasting appointment. Edwin had talked about it for weeks. He wanted everything precise, everything planned. The morning of the appointment he called, calm voice, controlled. "I can't make it, investor situation." Elena tried to hide disappointment. "Oh, okay." Natalie's name came next. "Natalie can go with you. She knows what I like anyway. Elena froze after the call ended. How did her sister know his preferences better than she did? The question stayed, unanswered, uncomfortable. The tasting itself felt wrong. Natalie knew exactly what Edwin liked. Too exactly. She corrected the consultant twice. No, Edwin prefers darker chocolate. No, he hates citrus fillings. Small details. Too small. Too precise. Elena felt something cold move through her chest. The next discovery came by accident. Elena was cleaning Edwin's car before a charity dinner they were supposed to attend. She found it between the passenger seat and center console. A silver earring, small sapphire stone. Her stomach dropped instantly. She knew it. Natalie had worn them at the engagement party. A family heirloom. Elena waited until evening, showed Edwin calmly. He didn't panic. That was what frightened her most. Oh, he said casually. I gave Natalie a ride last week when her car was being serviced. His explanation came too smoothly. You never mentioned that. He shrugged. It wasn't important. Not important. Elena repeated those words later in her head. Not important. She called Natalie. Natalie reacted instantly, too instantly. Oh, thank God, I thought I lost it forever. Same explanation, same wording, same timing, perfect alignment, too perfect. That night, Elena didn't sleep. Her brain kept replaying tiny moments, glances, texts, tone changes, patterns. Her appetite disappeared, weight dropped, dark circles formed under her eyes. She started therapy quietly, without telling Edwin, because deep down she already knew something was breaking. 3 weeks before the wedding, Edwin suggested postponing. I'm worried about you, he said. You seem unstable. The word hit harder than any accusation. Unstable. She asked what she did wrong. He hugged her. But there was no warmth, only obligation. That night she woke up around 3:10 a.m. His side of the bed was empty. A faint light from the guest room. Whispered voice. Edwin's voice. Soft. Careful. Not now, she might hear. Pause. I know. Soon. Silence. Elena didn't open the door. Some part of her wasn't ready to confirm what she already understood. The next day, she decided to do something simple. Bring him lunch. Normal couples did that. Maybe normal behavior could fix abnormal distances. Her father called while she was leaving, concerned. Are you eating enough? I'm fine, she lied. I'm bringing Edwin lunch. Good, her father said. He better be treating you right. Elena didn't answer. Security at Edwin's office knew her. She rode the elevator up holding his favorite sandwich from a deli near her office, practicing a smile in the mirror, trying to look like herself again. His assistant Marissa Cole looked shocked when Elena arrived. We weren't expecting you. Her eyes flicked toward Edwin's closed office door, then back. He's in a meeting. Elena lifted the lunch bag. I'll wait. Marissa stepped in front of her. He asked not to be disturbed. Too fast, too defensive. Elena felt something inside her go very still. Is he alone? She asked. Marissa hesitated. That hesitation told the truth. Elena didn't wait. She opened the door. Some memories never fade. This became one of them. Edwin leaning against his desk. Natalie pressed against him, his hands on her waist, her fingers in his hair, kissing like people who had done it many times. Not new, not accidental. Practiced. Neither noticed Elena at first. She had several seconds to see everything, to understand everything, to lose everything. When the door clicked shut, they jumped apart. 3 people, 3 realities. Edwin adjusted his tie immediately. This isn't... Natalie didn't deny it. She lifted her chin, defiant. We didn't plan it. Elena's voice came out calm. Too calm. How long? Edwin avoided eye contact. Let's talk privately. How long? Natalie answered. 5 months. 5 months. Half the engagement. While Elena was choosing invitations. While she was tasting cakes. While she was building a future. They were destroying it. Edwin moved behind his desk, creating distance, like a negotiation. I didn't mean for this to happen. Feelings change. He spoke like a business meeting, careful, neutral, cowardly. Elena dropped the lunch bag. I trusted you. Natalie looked almost uncomfortable. Almost. It just happened. Elena looked directly at her. No. Her voice didn't shake. For 5 months you made choices. Every message, every lie, every time you look at me. Edwin pressed the intercom. Marissa, please come. When she entered, he said, please escort Elena out. Like she was the problem. Elena straightened. I'll leave myself. Her voice stayed dignified, even while everything inside her collapsed. You deserve each other. She didn't cry until the elevator, didn't breathe properly until the parking garage. The drive home felt unreal. Fragments only, calling her mother, not forming sentences, sitting on the bathroom floor. Her parents arrived within an hour. Use the emergency key. Her mother held her. Her father paced, rage barely contained. I'll destroy him, he muttered. Margaret stopped him. We protect her first. The wedding was canceled, vendors contacted, deposits lost, plans erased. Elena returned the ring through Edwin's doorman. She couldn't see him. Natalie had already moved in. Her clothes were Elena's used to be, photos replaced, history overwritten. Edwin sent a cold email dividing assets. Natalie helped inventory Elena's belongings. The betrayal was complete. Later, Elena learned the truth. They met whenever she worked late. Natalie created reasons to visit, messages, photos, opportunities, deliberate pursuit. The scandal spread. Some friends supported Elena, others chose Edwin's influence. Some admitted they suspected. No one warned her. That hurt almost as much. During those months, Margaret became Elena's anchor, cooking when she wouldn't eat, staying overnight, listening, trying to mediate peace. One dinner ended everything. Natalie snapped, you always got everything first. The grades, the career, the life. For once I got something before you. Elena answered quietly, he wasn't a prize. He was someone I loved. Margaret put down her fork. Natalie Steele, apologize. Natalie didn't. He chose me. Elena stood. I can't do this anymore. That was the last dinner they ever shared. And Elena didn't know then that the worst wasn't the betrayal. It was what came after. Margaret Steele aged more in the months after the betrayal than Elena had seen in the previous 10 years combined. The lines around her eyes deepened. Her voice grew quieter. And yet she still kept trying to do what mothers like her always try to do, long after hope becomes unrealistic. She kept trying to hold the family together, even after one daughter had shattered the other, even after every dinner became a battlefield, even after silence itself began to feel safer than conversation. 6 months after catching Edwin Knight with Natalie in his office, Elena hit the lowest point of her life. Not the dramatic kind, not the cinematic kind, the dangerous kind. The kind where a person keeps functioning just enough to fool everyone except the people who know them best. Her therapist called it major depression. The diagnosis didn't shock Elena. By then, she had already felt herself disappearing. She couldn't focus, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't eat without forcing it, couldn't walk into a grocery store, restaurant, hotel lobby, or jewelry ad without feeling like the world was mocking her. Work began to crack too. Until then, Elena had held on to professionalism like it was the last stable part of her identity. Then, during a major client presentation, she lost her place halfway through a deck she had prepared herself. A silence stretched. Someone asked a question, and Elena, who had once been known for precision under pressure, stood in front of a boardroom full of executives and burst into tears. Not polite tears, not graceful tears. The kind that humiliates you because they come from someplace far below dignity. Her supervisor suggested a leave of absence. He was careful about it, compassionate. But Elena heard the truth underneath it. She was no longer holding herself together. And deep down, she knew something else too. Staying in Portland was killing her. Every street had memory attached to it. Every cafe had hosted a conversation. Every neighborhood carried before and after versions of her life. Healing in the same place where she had been dismantled began to feel impossible. So, when an internal opening came up in the company's Chicago office for a strategy director role, Elena applied before she had time to talk herself out of it. She told people it was for career growth, and that was true. But it was also an escape. The interview went well because desperation often looks a lot like clarity. 2 weeks later, she got the offer. Margaret helped her pack, carefully wrapping framed photographs in tissue paper, sorting books into boxes, folding sweaters with a slowness that said she was trying not to cry. The question came the way difficult questions in families like theirs always came. Quietly, without accusation, without pressure. "Do you think you'll ever forgive Natalie?" Elena didn't look up. She kept folding. "I don't know." Margaret sealed another box. "Forgiveness isn't always about the other person." Elena gave a tired smile that wasn't really a smile. "I know, but I'm not there." Margaret sat beside her on the edge of the bed. "Just don't confuse leaving with healing." That one landed, because it was true. Elena turned toward her mother, eyes already filling. "I need space before healing can even start." Margaret nodded, then pulled her into a hug. "Then take the space. Just don't disappear." Elena promised she wouldn't. Saying goodbye to her parents was harder than she expected. Her father held her longer than usual, his voice rough, emotional in the way men from his generation often tried to hide. "You build a life so good they'd choke on the sight of it." At the time, Elena almost smiled. Later, she would remember those words with startling precision, because that was exactly what happened. Chicago was not magical. It was lonely, cold, unfamiliar, and indifferent to her pain, which in some ways made it the perfect place to start over. Her apartment was smaller than the one she had left behind, cleaner, more anonymous, no shared memories, no emotional ghosts in the corners. She worked constantly, long hours at the office, takeout dinners eaten over strategy decks, weekends spent pretending productivity was the same thing as healing. For a while, that was enough. Then the phone call came. Sunday morning. Margaret's voice was careful in the way voices become careful when they're about to reopen a wound. "I thought you should hear it from me." Elena already knew. Somehow she already knew. Natalie and Edwin got married yesterday. There had been a courthouse ceremony. Small, elegant, just enough people to make it socially respectable. Just enough coverage to make sure it was seen. A photo had already made its way into a regional society column. Natalie in a white tailored dress, Edwin beside her, smiling, and on Natalie's hand, Elena's ring. That night, Elena reached a second bottom. She sat alone in her apartment with a bottle of wine and the old photos she should have deleted months earlier. She looked through images of vacations, dinners, smiles, the visual evidence of a life that had once felt secure. She cried until her face ached, until her body felt emptied out, until grief turned from sharp into numb. And somewhere in the silent gray hour before morning, something inside her changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but permanently. She got up, deleted every photo of Edwin from her phone, blocked both him and Natalie on everything, deleted old email folders, archived numbers she no longer wanted attached to her life. Then she stood under the shower for so long the water turned cold. And for the first time since the betrayal, she made a decision that wasn't about survival. It was about ownership. This would be the last day they controlled the emotional weather of her life. Change didn't happen in one montage. It happened in repetition, in discipline, in small, humiliating acts of rebuilding. Elena returned to work with a different kind of focus. Not the brittle perfectionism she used before. Something harder, cleaner. She stopped trying to feel motivated and started acting consistently. Her performance improved, then accelerated. Senior leadership noticed. She took over difficult accounts others didn't want, solved internal crises, handled impossible personalities. Within months, she built a reputation in the Chicago office as someone who could walk into unstable situations and restore order. Which made sense. She had become an expert in emotional triage. Outside work, healing came slower. The first real friend she made in the city was Camille Mercer, the company's HR director. Camille was observant without being intrusive, warm without being naive. She invited Elena to a book club, then to dinners, then into a wider circle of women who had all survived some version of disappointment and chose humor as resistance. That was the first time Chicago stopped feeling temporary. Camille tried more than once to set Elena up. Elena declined every time. Romance still felt less like possibility and more like exposure. Trust was no longer abstract to her. It had become a risk calculation. 4 months after moving, Elena was sent to represent the firm at a technology conference in San Francisco. She almost didn't go. Travel still exhausted her. Small talk still felt performative. But she went. And on the second evening, at a private dinner for investors and agency partners, she found herself seated next to Julian Cross. Julian was nothing like Edwin. That was the first thing she noticed. Edwin had always taken up space like he expected a room to respond to him. Julian did the opposite. He made other people feel more intelligent in conversation. He listened fully, asked thoughtful questions, never interrupted to impress. He had built and sold a cybersecurity company, was investing selectively, and spoke about business with genuine interest rather than ego theater. There was no performance in him, no polished charisma designed to overpower, just steadiness. And Elena, who had become highly sensitive to false signals, noticed that immediately. At the end of the dinner, he asked for her card. Nothing suggestive, nothing loaded, just professional. She gave it to him and expected that to be the end of it. The next morning, he emailed her. Coffee before her afternoon panel if she had time. They talked about digital branding trends for nearly 90 minutes, then stayed in touch afterward. At first, it was entirely professional. Referrals, industry notes, mutual contacts, the safe architecture of usefulness. Camille noticed before Elena did. He likes you. Elena didn't even look up from her salad. He respects me professionally. Camille smiled. That too. For 3 months, it stayed in that careful space between business and maybe. Then Julian asked her to dinner. A real dinner. No conference, no work purpose, no built-in excuse. Elena almost canceled twice, then forced herself to go. 20 minutes into the date, while they were discussing books, something unexpected happened. Her hands started shaking. Her chest tightened. Breathing became difficult. Panic moved through her body with old, familiar violence. Elena hated herself in that moment. Not because she was panicking, because she thought she should be past this. Julian didn't flinch, didn't stare, didn't overreact. He quietly asked if she wanted to step outside, sat with her, spoke gently, waited until the panic passed. He drove her home afterward and didn't ask for anything. No explanation, no emotional reward for being kind, no attempt to turn her vulnerability into intimacy. The next day, flowers arrived at her office with a note. No pressure, no expectations. I just hope today feels lighter. Elena stared at that note for a long time. That evening, she called him, and for the first time, she told the whole story, not the polished summary. Not the socially acceptable version, the real one. Natalie, Edwin, the office, the ring, the collapse, the move. Julian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her something he had never led with before. Years earlier, his wife had left him for his business partner during the most volatile stretch of his company's growth. The divorce had been ugly, the professional fallout worse. So when he said, "Broken trust changes the way you read people," he wasn't offering therapy language. He was telling the truth. That changed everything, because now she wasn't explaining herself to someone curious. She was talking to someone who understood the shape of damage. They didn't rush. That was the next difference. Julian never pushed for more than Elena could genuinely give. He didn't mistake patience for passivity. He simply stayed consistent. Dinner at quiet places, walks instead of crowded events, conversations that didn't require her to perform ease when she didn't feel it. On their 5th date, he cooked for her at his apartment instead of taking her somewhere loud. When anxiety surged unexpectedly, he knew how to help without making her feel fragile. That was when Elena understood something she had never known before. Trust is not rebuilt through grand gestures. It is rebuilt through repetition, through safety that remains safe. A year after moving to Chicago, Elena barely recognized her life. She had been promoted to senior strategy director. Her office overlooked the river. Her social circle had become real. Not huge, real. Camille, Nora, Priya, Tessa. Women who knew enough of the truth to protect her from loneliness without interrogating her scars. And strangest of all, she was in love again, deeply, quietly, without spectacle. Julian loved her in ways Edwin never had. He remembered details, respected boundaries, never weaponized honesty, never punished her for being thoughtful, ambitious, emotional, or careful. He didn't compare her, didn't compete with her, didn't need to diminish her to feel like a man. He made room for her life instead of trying to redesign it. Elena met his younger sister, Gabrielle Cross, during a visit from Seattle and liked her instantly. Gabrielle was sharp, funny, direct, and fiercely protective of Julian in a way that somehow made Elena trust the whole family more. For the first time in years, the future stopped feeling like something dangerous. Contact with home remained careful. Elena called Margaret weekly. Her father joined sometimes. Still gruff, still loving, still acting as though asking if she was sleeping well was not, in fact, concern. She visited twice that year, always timing the trip so she would not cross paths with Natalie and Edwin. Margaret occasionally gave updates. Their marriage looked perfect online. Charity galas, renovation photos, travel. A restored historic home in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Curated happiness. That was all Elena let herself know. Once, while stirring pasta at her stove, she asked quietly, "Does Natalie ever ask about me?" Margaret paused. "Sometimes." "What do you tell her?" "That you're doing well." Elena stared at the steam rising from the pot. "Does she ever regret it?" Margaret sighed. "She gets quiet when your name comes up." It wasn't enough to heal anything, but Elena remembered it, because silence from people like Natalie was rarely guilt-free. Therapy continued, and this time healing became more than emergency management. Elena learned her triggers, learned how betrayal had altered her nervous system, learned how to separate present reality from old danger. The nightmares faded, not all at once, but gradually, like weather changing. In early summer, Julian surprised her with a weekend trip to Michigan wine country. It was simple, beautiful, vineyards, long dinners, lake air, no performance, no pressure, just peace. On the final evening, under an old trellis wrapped in climbing roses, Julian took both her hands and looked at her with the steadiness that had become the defining feature of his love. "Knowing you has been the most honest thing in my life." Then he reached into his jacket and took out a ring box. Panic flashed through Elena for one terrible second. Not because of him, because memory can still strike even in safe places. Julian saw it instantly. So he did something Edwin never would have done. He slowed down. "I'm not asking you to answer because I'm on one knee," he said softly. "I'm telling you that whether your answer is tonight, 6 months from now, or never, loving you has already changed my life for the better." That broke something open in her. Not fear, the last of it. Elena's eyes filled with tears, this time not from pain, from certainty. "Yes," she whispered. Then with more strength, "Yes, I'm ready." The ring was nothing like the one Edwin had given her. No excess, no spectacle. A graceful emerald center stone with 2 smaller diamonds at the sides. Refined, intentional. Beautiful because it meant something, not because it announced something. That night she called her parents. Margaret cried. Her father cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. "He sounds like a good man." "He is," Elena said, and for the first time saying it didn't feel like hope. It felt like fact. They planned a small wedding in Chicago, private, elegant, about 30 guests, only people who mattered. At Margaret's request, Elena sent an invitation to Natalie. Not out of reconciliation, not really, more like closure offered in written form. Natalie replied quickly. Short email, polite, cold, congratulations. Unfortunately, Edwin and I already have plans that weekend. Wishing you both the best. Margaret seemed disappointed. Elena wasn't. Some absences are a gift. Their wedding day was intimate and warm. Friends, family, Julian's sister, Elena's parents. No society column, no spectacle, no performance. Just vows spoken by 2 people who understood exactly what trust cost. And afterward, Elena didn't think about Natalie once. Not during dinner, not during the music, not even when she looked down at the new ring on her hand. Because by then the center of her life had shifted. Her past was no longer the main character. Her future was. Years passed. Her career kept rising. Julian's investments expanded. They built a life with structure, privacy, and the kind of mutual respect that never needs advertising. Elena repaired what could be repaired inside herself, and left the rest buried. By the time Margaret got sick, Elena was no longer the woman Natalie had betrayed. She was someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone harder to intimidate, someone who no longer needed revenge to survive. Which was precisely why, when fate finally placed them all back in the same room, Elena was the only one who wasn't afraid. Elena's father walked her down the aisle at her wedding and whispered something she never forgot. I haven't seen you this happy in years." At the time, she almost broke down hearing it, because happiness had once felt like a language she might never speak fluently again. But Julian Cross had changed that. Not with theatrics, not with intensity, with steadiness. His vows that day had reflected exactly who he was. "I promise never to treat trust like something automatic," he told her, voice calm, eyes unwavering. "I know how rare it is. I know what it costs, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of yours." That was the kind of love Elena built her second life around. Not exciting in the shallow way people envy online. Something much more dangerous than that. Reliable. They built their marriage carefully. A restored brownstone in Chicago. A long renovation done room by room, with arguments about lighting and tile and bookshelf placement that somehow became some of Elena's favorite memories. Her career kept rising. The senior strategy director became executive vice president. Julian's investment firm expanded too, earning a reputation for backing founder-led companies other firms had underestimated, especially women building in sectors men still liked to patronize. Their life was private, tasteful, intentional. It did not need witnesses to be real. The first strange thread connecting Julian to Elena's past came at a dinner with investors nearly a year into their marriage. A venture capitalist, half a glass too relaxed, mentioned Edwin Knight's name in passing. "Knight had a brutal collapse after that Angel Stage rivalry years back," he said. "Cross backed the right company. Knight backed the competitor. Cross's side exited beautifully. Knight's position cratered. It took him years to recover." Elena said nothing at the moment. Later that night, in the quiet of their kitchen, she looked at Julian across the island and asked the obvious question. "You knew who Edwin was before San Francisco, didn't you?" Julian didn't insult her by pretending to be confused. "Yes." "How much did you know?" "That you'd once been engaged to him, that there had been fallout, not the full story, not then." "Why didn't you say anything?" Julian leaned back against the counter, expression open. "Because I wanted whatever existed between us to belong to us. Not to him, not to your past, and not to some symmetry neither of us had chosen yet." Elena stared at him for a long moment, then laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because life had a cruel sense of architecture. Edwin had once chosen ego over loyalty, and years later, without knowing it, he had lost on both fronts. 2 years into the marriage, Elena and Julian started trying for a baby. For a while, they did what happy couples do. They assumed time would take care of it. Then time did what it often does. It became a topic, then a concern, then a string of specialist appointments, blood work, calendars, medications, quiet tears in bathrooms, and conversations that always seemed to happen in parked cars after appointments rather than at home. Julian never let grief become Elena's private burden. He sat beside her in waiting rooms, held her after procedures, reminded her when disappointment turned cruel that family is built in more than one form, and that love does not become smaller simply because life looks different than expected. It was during that season of trying, hoping, and adjusting that Margaret's diagnosis came. Aggressive cancer, already advanced. Elena and Julian flew to Portland immediately. The shift was instant. Career paused, travel rearranged, priorities stripped down to their essential truth. Margaret tried to be practical even then. She asked about paperwork, the house, her husband's medications, whether Elena had been sleeping, whether Julian was eating enough when he traveled. She did what women like her always did. She stayed a mother while dying. Elena took leave from work and moved back temporarily into her childhood home to help care for her. Julian flew in every weekend, sometimes more. He moved through the house quietly, repairing small things, handling logistics, giving Elena's father the kind of masculine companionship grief-struck men often accept more easily when it isn't labeled emotional support. In Margaret's final weeks, the conversations became softer, clearer. One evening, while Elena adjusted her pillows and helped her sip water, Margaret brought up the subject both of them had spent years stepping around. "Natalie." Elena's hands paused. Margaret watched her for a moment. "I'm not asking you to erase what happened." Elena swallowed. "Then what are you asking?" Margaret's voice had gone thin, but not weak. "I'm asking you not to let that wound be the last thing that defines you as sisters." Elena looked down at the blanket, at the hands that had once done everything for them. "I don't know if peace is possible." "Maybe not," Margaret whispered, but try not to make hatred your inheritance. That one stayed with Elena, because that was exactly how Margaret thought. Not in terms of who was right, in terms of what people carried forward. Elena promised she would try, not because she was ready, because dying mothers are impossible to refuse. Margaret passed 3 days later. Quietly, at home, Elena holding one hand, her father the other. Julian near the window, standing witness to the end of the woman who had, in many ways, made Elena who she was. Afterward, Elena called Natalie herself, the first direct contact in years. When Natalie answered, Elena spoke only 3 words. Mom is gone. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. Then Natalie's voice suddenly stripped of polish. I'll be there. The days that followed were too busy for emotion to move cleanly. There were calls to make, papers to sign, a funeral home to meet with, clothes to choose, food to arrange. A grave plot to confirm. Natalie arrived within the hour with Edwin. That first hug between sisters was brief and awkward, and more about acknowledging death than each other. No warmth, no scene, just shock wrapped in old history. Elena noticed 2 things immediately. First, Natalie still knew how to perform composure. Second, Edwin was watching the house as though measuring what remained of his access to it. Julian arrived later that evening from Chicago, and from the moment he stepped inside, the emotional geometry of the house changed. Elena's father visibly relaxed. Natalie looked at him too long, and Edwin, though polite, seemed unable to decide whether Julian was merely impressive or somehow familiar. The funeral would answer that. The morning of Margaret's burial arrived under a low gray sky and fine, needling rain. Elena stood in her childhood bedroom, fastening the sleeve of her black dress, staring at her reflection with the strange detachment that sometimes comes before major emotional collisions. Behind her, Julian adjusted his cufflinks. He met her eyes in the mirror and stepped closer, resting both hands lightly on her shoulders. I'm right beside you today. It was such a simple sentence, and because it was him, it was enough. Downstairs, Elena's father sat at the kitchen table with untouched coffee and the newspaper folded but unread. Grief had bent him, not physically alone, structurally. He looked like someone trying to remember how to exist in a house that had lost its center. Ready, Dad? Elena asked softly. He stood slowly. Your mother used to say funerals are for the living, he murmured. I never understood how hard that was until now. At the funeral home, people had already begun gathering. Extended family, neighbors, former colleagues, old friends of Margaret's from every chapter of her life. Elena stayed close to her father, accepting condolences, recognizing faces half through memory and half through stories she'd heard over the years. Everyone said some version of the same thing. Your mother was extraordinary. She was kind. She was the glue. She loved deeply. Elena believed all of it. And then the room shifted. Not loudly, but visibly. A ripple of attention moved across the lobby. Natalie and Edwin had arrived. Natalie entered first. Elegant black dress, diamond earrings, hair smooth, posture perfect, expression arranged into sophisticated grief. Edwin beside her in a sharply tailored dark suit, one hand lightly at her back, as if the 2 of them were still practiced in being watched. Natalie's ring caught the light almost instantly. That ring. Elena had not seen it in person in years. It looked gaudier now, not because it had changed, because meaning had. Her father stiffened beside her. Elena touched his wrist gently. Breathe. Natalie hugged him first. He returned it, but only barely. Edwin offered a handshake that Elena's father accepted out of discipline rather than affection. Then Natalie turned to Elena. It's been a long time. Yes, Elena said. Nothing else. Edwin gave a restrained nod. Sorry for your loss. Elena looked at him evenly. Thank you. That could have been the end of it. But Natalie had never been built to let a neutral moment stay neutral. Could we talk privately? She asked. Elena should have refused. She knew that even then. But funerals make people do strange things in the name of their dead. So she followed her into a small side room off the main hall. Just 2 chairs, a box of tissues, muted wallpaper, the kind of room built for quiet breakdowns. Natalie closed the door and turned. For the first time, Elena saw the strain under the expensive presentation. The tiny lines around her eyes, the tightness in the mouth. the restless movement of her fingers against her ring. "You look different," Natalie said. "Life tends to do that." Natalie gave a faint smile. Then, almost immediately, she shifted into something Elena knew too well: performance through superiority. "Edwin and I bought a summer property on the Cape," she said lightly. "We're renovating the upper floor now. We may turn it into a nursery." Elena said nothing, so Natalie continued. "His last acquisition went very well. We've been traveling a lot. Things are good." There it was. Not grief, not reconciliation, not apology, scorekeeping. At their mother's funeral. Elena looked at her sister and, for the first time in years, felt no fresh pain, only distance. Natalie noticed the silence and misread it. That was the fatal error. "You always hated losing gracefully," she said softly. "I just thought, after all this time, you'd want to know I made the right choice." 6 years earlier, that sentence would have torn Elena open. Now it revealed something else. Natalie still needed Elena as an audience, which meant Natalie had never actually won in the way she claimed. Elena smiled. Not sharp, not bitter, genuinely amused. "Have you met my husband yet?" Natalie's expression changed so quickly it was almost physical. "What?" Elena opened the door. Julian was already there, having no doubt clocked the tone of the exchange from a distance. "Julian," Elena said calmly, "come meet my sister." He stepped into the room, and a second later, Edwin appeared behind him, likely drawn by instinct, control, or suspicion. Then it happened. The first look. Julian and Edwin recognized each other immediately. Edwin's face drained of color, not dramatically, just enough. Just enough for Elena to see the exact second his confidence destabilized. "Cross," he said. Julian's voice was calm. "Night." Natalie looked between them. Her eyes moved first to Julian, then to Elena, then sharply back to Edwin. The room had changed and she could feel it, even before she understood why. "You know each other?" she asked. Julian answered before Edwin could recover. "We crossed paths in venture circles years ago." Edwin attempted a smile, thin, controlled, failing. "It's been a while." "About 7 years," Julian said evenly, "since the Orlex deal." Now even Natalie understood enough to be unsettled, because Orlex had not been just another deal. It had been a notorious split in early-stage investing circles, the kind of loss people with ambition remember privately for years. Edwin cleared his throat. "You're married." Elena stepped beside Julian and slid her hand into his. 2 years. Natalie stared, not at the ring first, at Elena's face, at the lack of need in it. Then finally at Julian, at his watch, his posture, the effortless self-possession, the kind that doesn't require display because it comes from actual position. "Julian Cross," she repeated slowly. "Cross Ventures?" Julian nodded once. "The same." Edwin tried to repair ground he no longer controlled. "We should catch up sometime. There may be overlap between some things we're looking at." Julian gave him the kind of polite answer that is more humiliating than open rejection. "My office can speak with yours if something relevant comes up." Not "I'll call you," not "let's do that." My office, if relevant. Elena saw Edwin register every word. The funeral director appeared at the doorway then, letting them know the service was about to begin. But the damage had already been done. When they returned to the main chapel, the air around them felt subtly electrified. Not because anyone knew the full story, because people with social instincts can smell a hierarchy shift before they understand it. And the shift was unmistakable. Natalie no longer walked like the victor. Edwin no longer looked comfortable in his own suit. Julian sat beside Elena and her father with quiet ease. The service began. Margaret's favorite hymn played first, then the reading, then the eulogy. Elena stood and spoke about her mother's discipline, warmth, and moral steadiness, about how Margaret had taught strength without cruelty, dignity without performance, about the way she made ordinary life feel held together. There were tears across the room by the time Elena sat down. Then Natalie rose to speak. At first she managed. 1 sentence, 2. Then her voice caught. She looked at the portrait of their mother. Tried again, failed. The tears came suddenly, not elegant this time. Real, unmanaged. Without thinking, Elena stood and moved beside her, placing a hand lightly against her back. "It's okay," she murmured. And for a brief, strange moment, the room saw what Margaret had always wanted and what neither daughter had known how to become. Not reconciled, but human. Natalie finished the eulogy shaking, and when she sat back down, she did not look at Edwin. She looked at the floor. At the cemetery, the rain deepened. Umbrellas opened. Shoes sank slightly into softened ground. Elena stayed close to her father as they lowered Margaret into the earth. Julian remained on his other side, steady as ever. Natalie stood near them, her makeup beginning to blur despite her best efforts. Edwin drifted a few steps away more than once, checking his phone, scanning the people around him, looking like a man who wanted to leave but couldn't do so without creating optics. Elena noticed. So did others. And because funerals amplify character rather than hide it, people were noticing more than they said. At the reception afterward, held at her parents' house, the emotional undercurrent only sharpened. Neighbors brought food. Margaret's friends shared stories. Family members moved in clusters. And slowly, almost invisibly, attention gravitated toward Julian. Not because he demanded it, because people enjoyed him. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered names, spoke to Elena's father with respect rather than pity. Even Margaret's oldest friends, women who could spot arrogance in seconds, took to him instantly. Edwin saw that too. Elena could feel it. Every time laughter rose from the group gathered around Julian in the dining room, Edwin's face tightened fractionally. Every time someone asked Elena about Chicago, about work, about Julian's firm, Natalie became a little quieter. Then came the final shift of the afternoon. One of Margaret's old family friends, a woman with no instinct for social caution and no interest in preserving appearances, said warmly in front of 3 separate clusters of guests, "Margaret told me once she worried Elena's first engagement had protected her from the wrong life by breaking her heart early. Looking at her now, I think she was right." Silence followed. Not full silence. The kind of selective social silence that falls when a truth has landed in public and everyone knows it. Natalie's hand tightened visibly around her glass. Edwin looked away. Elena felt the sentence move through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. Margaret's hidden moral legacy. Even after death, she had somehow named the truth. Not cruelly, precisely. Elena did not add to it, did not smile, did not react. She simply turned and asked her father if he needed tea, which somehow made the moment even worse for Natalie. Because the most powerful thing Elena had done all day was this. She had not fought for the better life. She had simply been seen living it. And by late afternoon, Natalie understood something she had not expected to learn at her mother's funeral. Elena had not remained behind in the ruins. She had rebuilt beyond reach. Edwin understood something too. The woman he had once dismissed as stable, predictable, and replaceable was now standing beside a man whose name alone had once been enough to unsettle entire rooms he wanted to impress. And worse than that, she looked happy. Not performativity, not competitively. Actually, that was what destabilized him most, because regret is easy to suppress when you believe the other person stayed broken. It becomes much harder when they didn't. As the last guests began to leave and evening settled over the house, Elena caught Natalie standing alone near the back window, staring out into the rain-dark yard. For a second, Natalie looked less like a rival, and more like someone who had spent too many years building her self-worth on a theft that no longer felt valuable. Elena almost walked over, almost said something kind. Then she remembered Margaret's words. Try not to make hatred your inheritance. Not forgiveness, not yet, but not hatred either. So Elena did the only thing that fit the day, the history, and the truth. She let Natalie stand in the consequences of her own choices without rescuing her from them. And upstairs, where no guests could hear, the first cracks in Natalie and Edwin's marriage had already begun to spread. By the end of the reception, Elena no longer needed confirmation that something in Natalie's life was cracking. She could see it, not in any one dramatic gesture, in the smaller things. The way Natalie's smile kept fading half a second too early. The way Edwin drifted farther from her as the afternoon wore on. The way he checked his phone when he thought no one was watching. The way Natalie kept glancing toward Elena and Julian with an expression that no longer looked smug or competitive or even defensive. It looked hollow. And for the first time in years, Elena didn't feel triumph. She felt distance. The kind that only comes when pain has finally stopped asking to be avenged. There were also whispers. Nothing vulgar, nothing open. Just the quiet murmur of people piecing things together the way people always do in rooms full of history. Elena overheard fragments. Edwin's last acquisitions had gone badly. Cash flow problems, debt restructuring, a lender issue, a partnership that had fallen through. Enough to suggest what Natalie's confidence at the funeral home had really been. Not superiority. Desperation with lipstick on. Still, Elena did what her mother would have expected. She remained composed. She stayed close to her father. Thanked people for coming. Walked elderly relatives to the door. Refilled coffee trays. Accepted hugs. Listened to stories about Margaret she had never heard before. And every time she felt the old version of herself stir, the one who once would have needed Natalie to suffer in order to feel restored, she let that feeling pass without feeding it. Because grief had a way of exposing what still owned you, and Natalie no longer did. The next morning, Julian was supposed to return to Chicago for a board meeting that could not be moved. He offered to cancel it anyway. "Say the word," he told her while packing his overnight bag. "I'll stay." Elena shook her head. "Dad needs help here. You need to be there. Go." He studied her for a moment. Not because he doubted her, because he always checked whether her strength was real or simply performed for others. When he was satisfied, he kissed her forehead. "Call me if the day shifts." That was one of the things Elena loved most about him. He never confused support with control. After she dropped him at the airport, she drove back to her parents' house through a slow, gray rain. Her father was in the garden when she arrived, sitting beneath the covered patio with one of Margaret's old photo albums open on his lap. He looked smaller there, not fragile, reduced, as if grief had quietly taken up physical space inside him. "She labeled everything," he said, tapping the neat handwriting beneath each photo. "Said one day we'd be grateful to know who was who." Elena sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just turned pages. School pictures, birthday cakes, beach trips, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments that had become sacred because they were over. Later that afternoon, while her father went to have dinner with his brother, Elena began sorting through Margaret's bedroom. It was the kind of work grief pretends is practical, but is actually brutal. Every blouse held a memory. Every scarf belonged to a season. A gray dress Margaret had worn to Elena's first engagement party. A blue cardigan she always put on when she was cold in the evenings. A floral print she'd worn to Sunday lunches. Elena found herself speaking aloud as she worked, the way people sometimes do in houses where someone beloved has just died. Telling her mother things she already knew, that Chicago had been good to her, that Julian was kind, that she really had been happy, that she was sorry for all the years lost to silence. In the top drawer of the nightstand, she found a leather-bound journal. Margaret's handwriting filled years of pages, notes about family, worries she never voiced directly, small observations, private prayers. Elena turned carefully through the later entries, and in them she found what she had half expected and still wasn't prepared for. Natalie. Again and again. Margaret's grief over the rupture between her daughters, her failed efforts to bridge it, her fear that pride, shame, and time would harden into permanence. One entry from just 2 weeks before her death made Elena stop breathing for a moment. "I have made peace with leaving many things unfinished, but not this. Not my girls. If love could have repaired them, it would have. I only pray life humbles them into honesty before it is too late." Elena read that line twice, then a third time. She was still holding the journal when the doorbell rang. At first, she assumed it was a neighbor, another casserole, another bouquet, another person with condolences and not enough language. But when she looked through the front window, she saw Natalie standing on the porch alone. No Edwin, no driver, no performance. Just Natalie in a plain coat, hands clasped tightly, face stripped of everything except fatigue. Elena opened the door. "Hi," Natalie said. Her voice sounded smaller than Elena had ever heard it. "Can I come in?" In the kitchen, Elena put on coffee without asking whether Natalie wanted any. Habit more than hospitality. Natalie sat at the table in silence, staring at the wood grain like she was trying to gather the courage to look up. Without Edwin beside her, she seemed somehow younger and older at once. Not softer exactly, just less protected by the life she had spent years constructing around herself. Elena set a mug in front of her and sat down across from her. "Where's Edwin?" "At home," Natalie said. He doesn't know I'm here." The silence stretched, not empty, heavy. Years of unsaid things pressing against the walls. Natalie wrapped both hands around the mug but didn't drink. Then, finally, "I'm sorry for what I said yesterday." Elena didn't rescue her by answering too quickly. Natalie swallowed. "What I said in that room, it was cruel and pathetic, and I knew it while I was saying it." Elena gave a single nod. Not forgiveness, permission to continue. Natalie looked toward the hallway where Margaret's things still waited to be sorted. "Dad showed me part of Mom's journal last night. Then I found the rest this morning in her room." Elena's fingers tightened around her own cup. "I found it too." Natalie nodded and stared down again. "She knew," she said softly. "She always knew more than she said." "Yes." Another silence. Then Natalie laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You want honesty?" Elena held her gaze. "Yes." Natalie looked like she had been standing on the edge of this confession for years. When it finally came, it came all at once. "I'm miserable." There it was. No excuse first, no self-defense, no revision. Just truth. Natalie's chin trembled. "I have been for years." And once the first honest sentence was spoken, the rest followed like floodwater. Edwin had changed almost immediately after the wedding. Or maybe not changed, maybe revealed. Controlling where money went, monitoring spending, tracking schedules, questioning calls, turning every disagreement into a lecture about loyalty after everything he had sacrificed. His company had been unstable far longer than Natalie knew. Each new acquisition had been less strategy than panic. The house, the vacations, the curated life online, much of it had been funded by debt, image management, and increasingly desperate deals. "It was all a front," Natalie said, tears now slipping freely down her face. "Not all of it, maybe, but enough. Enough that I stopped knowing what was real and what was just another version of something we needed people to believe." Elena listened quietly. Not because she felt nothing, because this was the first real thing Natalie had given her in years. "Why stay?" Elena asked. Natalie gave the bleakest smile Elena had ever seen. At first, pride, then shame, then fear. "And after that, I didn't know how to admit I had blown up our family for a life I didn't even want anymore." She wiped at her face angrily. "The worst part is that for a long time I kept pretending to myself that I had won. Even when I was miserable. Even when I knew I was miserable, because if I admitted the truth, then I had to admit what I had done to you for nothing." That landed harder than Elena expected. Not because it erased anything, because it finally named the disease correctly. Natalie had not betrayed her for love. She had betrayed her for victory. And victory had turned out to be a room she couldn't breathe in. "There's a prenup," Natalie said after a moment. "And yes, I've already spoken to a lawyer. Quietly. I'm leaving him. I needed to tell you before I did. I needed at least one person in this family to hear the truth from me before the story turns into something else." Elena reached for the journal and slid it across the table. "Read the last pages." Natalie opened it with shaking hands. As she read, her face changed. Collapsed, really. All the effort it took to remain composed simply gave way. Because grief from a mother is harder to deflect than anger from a sister. Natalie pressed her hand over her mouth and cried into the silence of the kitchen. Not elegantly, not strategically. The kind of crying that strips a person of image. "She never stopped hoping," Natalie whispered. "No," Elena said. "She didn't." For a long time, neither of them moved. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped lightly at the window. The house smelled like old coffee and funeral flowers. Then Natalie said the one thing Elena had needed and never expected to hear. "I hated you for being what I should have tried to become on my own." Elena blinked. Natalie stared at the journal. "You were disciplined, loved, steady. Mom trusted you. People respected you. And instead of building my own life, I kept trying to win yours. By the time I understood the difference, I had ruined both." That was the closest thing to a full confession there would ever be. And strangely, it was enough. Not enough to erase. Enough to clarify. They spent the next few hours sorting through Margaret's things together. Not magically healed. Not suddenly restored to sisterhood. but changed. They talked in fragments, memories rising where defenses used to live. Natalie remembered how their mother used to leave different notes in each lunchbox because she refused to repeat herself. Elena remembered Margaret making separate batches of cookies because Natalie liked sugar cookies, and Elena insisted chocolate chips were the only kind that mattered. Once, unexpectedly, they both laughed. The sound startled them, then made them cry again. By evening, something delicate had formed between them. Not trust, not yet, but a bridge, narrow, shaking, real. When Natalie stood to leave, Elena walked her to the door. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Natalie pulled on her coat slowly. "I file when my lawyer says it's safest. I get a small place. I find work that isn't attached to his name. I learn how to be embarrassed and survive it." She looked up. "And you?" Elena thought of Chicago, of Julian, of the life waiting for her that no longer needed to prove itself against anyone. "I go home." Natalie gave a faint, aching smile. "You really are happy, aren't you?" Elena answered honestly. "Yes." Natalie nodded once. "I'm glad one of us learned how." They hugged then. Brief, awkward, human, not forgiveness, a beginning. When Elena returned to Chicago, life did not become dramatic again. That was part of the gift. It became steady. She and Julian slipped back into their rhythms. Work, dinners at home, flights between cities tapering off as grief softened into memory. Some weeks later, Edwin called. Elena almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. His voice sounded different, still careful, but worn through. "I know Natalie came to see you." Elena said nothing. Edwin exhaled on the other end. "She's leaving." Again, Elena said nothing. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I suppose there's a version of this where I ask whether you're satisfied." That almost sounded like the old Edwin, trying to frame emotional reality as negotiation. But the edges were gone. Then he said the thing Elena never thought she would hear from him. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." There it was. Not because Natalie was leaving, not because money was tight, because for the first time, perhaps, he had finally been forced to compare illusion with substance, and lost. Elena stood by the kitchen window while he spoke, looking out over the Chicago street below. "You didn't call to apologize," she said quietly. He was silent, because they both knew it was true. He had called to confess regret, not to carry accountability. There was a difference. "I hope," Elena said at last, "that one day you understand those are not the same thing." Then she ended the call, and with that, Edwin Knight became what he should have become years earlier. Someone from her past with no authority over her peace. 6 months after Margaret's death, Elena learned she was pregnant. After all the appointments, all the waiting, all the private grief, the test sat in her hand while disbelief turned slowly into tears. She laughed when she told Julian. He cried. Actually cried. Then laughed at himself for crying. They held each other in the middle of the bathroom floor like two people who had learned not to underestimate quiet miracles. The joy was complicated, of course. Margaret would never meet her grandchild. That absence stayed sharp, but it no longer ruined joy. It simply sat beside it, as some grief always does. Natalie and Elena remained in cautious contact. Phone calls every few weeks, then more regularly. Natalie filed for divorce, moved into a small apartment. Took a job at a mid-sized marketing firm under her own name, with no social cushion and no one left to impress. The fallout in Boston was brutal. People who once admired her confidence suddenly called it what it had always partly been. Calculation, vanity, climbing. Some former friends disappeared. Others stayed only long enough to collect details. For once, Natalie had no shield against public opinion, and for once she endured it without inventing a superior version of the story. Elena respected that more than she expected to. Her father changed too, not all at once, but enough. He started sleeping through the night again, started going back into the garden, started telling stories about Margaret without breaking halfway through them. One afternoon, months later, Elena found him sitting with a cup of tea beneath the same covered patio where they had gone through the photo album after the funeral. He looked at her belly, then up at her, and smiled in a way she had not seen since before Margaret got sick. "Your mother would have loved this," he said. Elena sat beside him. "I know." He was quiet for a while. Then, She used to worry you were too loyal for this world. Elena smiled faintly. She was right, he nodded. But she also used to say that once you saw the truth, really saw it, no one would ever be able to fool you twice. That stayed with Elena, because it explained something she had taken years to understand. What had happened to her with Edwin and Natalie had not made her weaker. It had made her clearer. Late one evening, after the nursery had been painted a soft green and Julian had fallen asleep on the couch with a book open on his chest, Elena sat alone in the doorway of the room that would soon belong to their child. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from safety. She rested one hand over her stomach and thought about all the lives she had already lived inside one lifetime. The woman who thought losing Edwin was the end of everything. The woman who cried on a bathroom floor and could not imagine a future larger than humiliation. The woman who rebuilt in a city that owed her nothing. The woman who learned the difference between being chosen and being cherished. The woman who stood at her mother's funeral and no longer needed revenge to feel whole. That, in the end, was what she had learned. Not that betrayal makes you stronger. It doesn't. It breaks something. But if you face that break honestly, if you rebuild with truth instead of pride, you stop confusing love with attention and survival with living. She had once thought Natalie stole her future. Now she understood something far more unsettling and far more freeing. Natalie had only taken the life Elena would have settled for, not the one she was meant to have. And maybe that was the cruel irony at the center of everything. The people who act like they've won by taking what was yours rarely understand they've taken a version of your life that no longer fits who you are becoming. Elena looked around the nursery, at the half-built crib, at the folded blankets, at the soft lamp waiting in the corner, then toward the living room where Julian still slept, one hand hanging loosely over the side of the couch, as familiar and beloved as breath. She smiled to herself, because peace, she had learned, does not always arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as perspective, as distance, as the quiet certainty that the life built after devastation is more honest than the one destroyed by betrayal ever was. And somewhere in that quiet house with rain moving gently against the windows and tomorrow waiting in the next room, Elena finally understood what her mother had been trying to teach her all along. Some losses do not ruin your life. They reveal it. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in the main character's place, and subscribe to Sinner Stories so you never miss a new video.